She grew up in a place where days passed quietly and dreams were kept small. Not because people lacked hope, but because life taught them to be careful. The streets were familiar, the faces known, and nothing much ever changed. Each morning followed the same pattern. Wake up early, help where needed, finish daily work, and return home before night fully settled in. Music was never meant to be more than background noise in that world. It played softly from old radios, from passing vehicles, or from phones during short breaks. It was comfort, not a future. From a young age, she noticed how sound made her feel. Certain tunes slowed her breathing. Others made her chest feel heavy without a clear reason. She never spoke about it. There were no lessons, no instruments bought just for her, and no one pushing her toward a stage. Stayed private, like a secret she didn't know how to explain. When she hummed, it was under her breath. When she tapped rhythms, it was on tables when no one was paying attention. Her days were filled with responsibility. There were errands to run, tasks to finish, and expectations to meet. People relied on her because she was steady and quiet. She listened more than she spoke. If someone needed help, she showed up. That's how people saw her. Reliable, ordinary, someone who blended into the background of everyday life. At home, evenings were simple. The room was small, the furniture worn but clean. After dinner, the noise of the day faded. This was when music found its way back to her. She would sit by herself, sometimes scrolling through old recordings, sometimes replaying melodies in her mind. She didn't think of herself as talented. To her, music was like breathing. You didn't brag about it. You just did it. She never imagined anyone listening closely. Whenever others were nearby, she kept it quiet. There was a fear she couldn't name. Not fear of failure, but fear of being seen. Being seen meant expectations, and expectations meant pressure. She was comfortable staying unnoticed. Outside her personal world, life moved on without drama. People talked about work, money, and plans that stayed mostly the same year after year. Big dreams belonged to other places, other people. Those who tried usually left. Those who stayed learned to be practical. She had learned that lesson early. There were moments, though, when something inside her pushed back. Late at night, when everyone else slept, she let herself sing freely. No audience, no judgment, just honesty. Those moments felt real. She didn't think about the future then. She didn't imagine applause or recognition. She only felt present. Friends and coworkers knew her as calm and dependable. Some joked that she was too quiet. Others said she was thoughtful. No one guessed that something powerful lived beneath that calm surface. And she made sure of it. Whenever someone mentioned talent or performance, she smiled politely and changed the subject. There was no single moment that hinted at what was coming. No sign, no warning. Just a series of ordinary days stacking up, one after another. That's what made it easy to believe nothing would ever change. On one particular day, life unfolded as usual. She woke early, prepared herself, and stepped into the familiar rhythm of her routine. The air felt normal. Nothing about that morning stood out. If she had known what would happen later, she might have felt nervous or excited. But she didn't. She carried on, unaware that this day would quietly separate her life into before and after. She went where she was supposed to go, surrounded by people who saw her the same way they always had. There was laughter, casual conversation, and background noise. Music played faintly somewhere, ignored by most. It blended into the environment, unnoticed. She didn't plan to sing or play anything that day. It wasn't on her mind. Her focus was on finishing what she needed to do and going home. Music, as always, stayed tucked away inside her. Looking back later, people would say there was something different about her that day. Maybe she seemed calmer, maybe more focused, but at the time, no one paid close attention. Why would they? She was just another person passing through an ordinary moment. What made her story special wasn't a dramatic beginning or a perfect setup. It was the quiet build-up. A life shaped by routine, humility, and hidden emotion. A person who never asked to be noticed and never tried to stand out. That is how all real stories begin. Not with applause or bright lights, but but with silence, with patience, with someone who carries something special without knowing what it could become. She had no idea that soon, someone would ask her for something small, just a simple tune, a harmless request that seemed unimportant. She didn't know that everything she had kept hidden would suddenly have a reason to surface. For now, she remained where she had always been, quiet, grounded, unprepared for the moment that would change everything forever. The day started like any other. She moved through familiar streets, greeted familiar faces, and carried out her tasks with quiet diligence. Everything seemed normal, ordinary, safe. Yet life has a way of shifting in ways no one expects, and sometimes the smallest things can open doors no one even knew existed. It happened mid-morning. She was near the center of her community, passing through a small gathering that had formed around a local event. People were chatting, laughing, and moving about in a casual rhythm. Music played faintly in the background, a gentle hum from a speaker nearby. It was barely noticed, just a part of the environment. She was walking past, focused on errands, when someone spoke to her directly, catching her off guard. They asked her to perform a simple tune. It was not meant to be a serious request. It was casual, almost an afterthought. Yet those words hung in the air longer than she expected. She froze, surprised, unsure how to respond. She looked around, realizing that a small crowd had turned their attention toward her. She had not anticipated this. She had never performed in front of anyone except herself. Her first instinct was to decline. She wanted to smile politely, say she couldn't, and walk away. She was comfortable in her silence. Performance was something she had kept to herself. She was not trained. She was not prepared. The thought of playing or singing in front of others made her stomach tighten. Felt risky, exposing, vulnerable. Yet as she looked at the faces around her, she noticed something else. There was no expectation of perfection. There was curiosity, but it was soft, not harsh. People were waiting, not demanding. The tune requested was simple. It wasn't a challenge or a test. It was an invitation. Her fingers brushed against the small instrument she had with her. It was worn, ordinary, nothing impressive. She had never thought much about it beyond personal comfort. But now, in her hands, it became a bridge. It was the only thing separating her quiet world from something that felt new, uncharted. She hesitated. Her heart raced, and yet a strange calm began to settle over her. She realized that the request was not about fame or judgment. It was about sharing, about a moment of connection with others. That thought alone was enough to sway her. She nodded slowly, accepting, not knowing what would happen next. The people around her shifted slightly, giving her space. There was a subtle expectation in the air, but it was gentle. They wanted to hear, not to criticize. That realization eased some of her tension. She took a breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and allowed herself to imagine the notes flowing, simple and unassuming. As she began, the sound was quiet at first, almost hesitant. She played each note with care, listening to how it felt, feeling it resonate in her chest. There was no rush. There was no pretense. Just honesty. As the tune unfolded, something shifted within the crowd. The initial casual attention grew into focus. People began to lean in, subtle expressions of curiosity and wonder spreading across their faces. She noticed it too. Her hands moved with more confidence, her heart beating steadily in rhythm with the music. The simple tune began to feel fuller, richer, more alive than she had ever imagined. Each note carried emotion she had never put into words, each pause a quiet reflection of her thoughts and feelings. She lost herself in the music, forgetting the audience, forgetting the small fears that had made her hesitate. The crowd around her was silent now, listening, captivated. She could see them exchanging glances, subtle nods, small smiles. They weren't looking for mistakes. They weren't expecting brilliance. They were simply present, sharing the moment with her. And that presence gave her courage. Time felt suspended. The simple tune became more than it was, stretching beyond her own expectations. She was not performing for approval, not seeking applause. She was expressing, sharing a part of herself that had lived quietly for years. Every note was personal yet universal. Touched something inside those who listened, even if they couldn't name it. When the last note hung in the air and faded naturally, there was a brief silence. It was the kind of pause that feels heavier than words, a quiet that speaks volumes. People exhaled collectively, some blinking as if to process what they had just heard. She opened her eyes, suddenly aware of the attention, and felt her heart skip. She hadn't expected this, and the reality was both overwhelming and exhilarating. People began to speak softly at first, then with more excitement. Compliments were offered, curiosity expressed, amazement shared. Some asked questions about how she had learned, how she had done it. She listened, feeling a mix of humility and disbelief. She had never imagined that one small, casual request could ripple outward in this way. Her own feelings were complicated. Relief mingled with surprise. Joy danced with nervous energy. She realized that this moment was no longer just about her. It had become a shared experience, a memory for those who witnessed it. And in that realization, she understood something important. Her quiet, hidden life, her private moments of music, had a place in the world after all. For the first time, she noticed the subtle ways people connected with her through the performance. Small gestures, nods, expressions, whispered conversations. They weren't grand, but they mattered. They were acknowledgement, respect, recognition, and it felt different from anything she had experienced before. In the hours that followed, the simple tune remained alive in everyone's minds. Conversations returned to their usual topics, but now music had a presence, a mark, a memory. People spoke of it as if it had changed the space itself, made it warmer, more intimate. They began to see her differently, though gently, with curiosity rather than expectation. She returned home that evening with a sense of quiet amazement. The day had begun ordinary and had shifted subtly, profoundly, without fanfare or exaggeration. She reflected on the request, the simple tune, the attention it had drawn. She realized that small things, offered honestly, could have enormous impact. Moments she had considered private or insignificant were suddenly meaningful in ways she had never imagined. Sitting alone later, she replayed the day in her mind. She didn't think about fame or recognition. She thought about the human connection, the shared experience. She felt gratitude, humility, and a growing curiosity about what might come next. The tune had been simple, but the effect had been extraordinary. And in that quiet reflection, she began to feel a sense of possibility, something she had never allowed herself to feel before. That night, she slept with a calm she had never known before. Not because her life had changed entirely, but because something fundamental had shifted inside her. The ordinary world remained outside, but within her, a new awareness had taken root. She had experienced something small, unexpected, and profoundly human, and it would not be forgotten. It was the beginning of a journey, unplanned, uncertain, but full of quiet promise, all sparked by a simple request for a simple tune. When the next opportunity came, it was unexpected, sudden, and small in its request, yet it carried weight she hadn't anticipated. Someone approached her at a local gathering, almost casually, and asked her to perform again. It was meant to be a simple tune, a short moment of music for a few people who were curious to hear more. She paused, remembering the previous experience, the way her music had quietly touched others. Doubts surfaced immediately. What if she couldn't replicate it? What if this time it didn't feel right? The fear of imperfection brushed against her confidence. Still, something inside nudged her forward. The first performance had opened a door, and now the door called to her. She took a deep breath and agreed, her hands slightly trembling, her mind trying to calm itself. She didn't know why, but she felt that this moment mattered more than she could explain. Music, which had always been private, was now stepping into the light, testing her courage and resolve. She was guided to a small corner where a few people had gathered. The space was quiet, calm, and unassuming. No stage, no microphones, just an ordinary corner in an ordinary room. She felt the weight of eyes on her, But it wasn't judgmental. It was curiosity, simple human attention, and that made it easier to begin. She adjusted her posture, found the right angle for her instrument, and began. The first notes were soft, gentle, almost shy, but they carried an unfamiliar strength. She let herself breathe with the music, letting it flow naturally. Unlike before, she felt a little more aware of the audience, their reactions, and yet she didn't stop the rhythm. The tune started simple, but she could feel it growing, expanding into a form she hadn't intended. Each note resonated with the honesty of her emotions, simple yet sincere, and slowly it captivated everyone in the room. People leaned in, eyes widened. There was a subtle change in the energy, a quiet recognition that this was more than a casual tune. She could feel it in the small gestures around her. The nods, the soft smiles, the attentive silence. They weren't expecting a show, yet the music demanded attention. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it carried depth, a richness that seemed to echo beyond the notes themselves. Her own awareness of the performance shifted. She realized that the music was not just something she played, but a conversation without words, yet full of meaning. The tune spoke of patience, of small joys, of hidden strength. She felt it in her chest, in her fingers, in the air around her. She became aware that this moment was more than just a performance. It was connection, human connection, and it felt profound. The room seemed to hold its breath. No one moved, no one spoke, but she could sense the impact of each note. They were listening not as critics, not as fans, but as people who had stumbled upon something real, unpolished yet full of emotion. The simplicity of the tune became a canvas for authenticity, and authenticity is something that always touches people deeply. As the final notes lingered, fading naturally into silence, there was a collective pause. It was the kind of silence that stretches, heavy with shared understanding. People exhaled, whispered to each other, and looked at her with a mixture of amazement and respect. She felt herself trembling slightly, not from fear but from the intensity of the moment. She had given something ordinary, yet it had become extraordinary in the eyes and hearts of others. One person stepped forward, breaking the quiet. They spoke gently, asking how she learned, how she discovered the ability to create such emotion from something simple. She smiled, humbled, and tried to explain that she had never had lessons, that music was her companion rather than a pursuit. Words felt inadequate, but they nodded, understanding more than what she could articulate. The ripple effect of that brief performance continued long after. People began to speak in hushed tones about the experience. They shared what it made them feel, the unexpected warmth, the quiet beauty, the subtle power of simplicity. She noticed it too, in the small acknowledgments, the gentle smiles, the curiosity in their eyes. She realized she had touched something human, something universal, and it was not through technique or training, but through honesty and openness. That evening, she reflected on what had happened. The world outside had not changed, the streets were still quiet, and life would continue its familiar rhythm. Yet within her a shift had occurred. The music had carried more than sound. It had carried understanding, connection, and a sense of purpose she hadn't dared to imagine. She felt the quiet pride of having shared herself, unpolished but genuine, with others who appreciated it. She began to see possibilities she had never considered. Perhaps her music could have a place in the wider world. Perhaps it could touch more people in small moments without the need for fanfare or recognition. The idea felt fragile yet exciting, like a small flame in the dark, promising warmth and light if nurtured carefully. In the days that followed, the memory of that small gathering lingered. She noticed people treating her differently, subtly, with newfound respect and curiosity. It wasn't about fame or attention. It was about being recognized as someone with a quiet, genuine gift. And that recognition, gentle as it was, felt like a validation of everything she had kept hidden for so long. The experience changed her internally as well. She began to practice more deliberately, exploring the feelings that music could carry. She experimented with melodies, rhythms, and harmonies that spoke to her emotions, her observations, her life. The simple tunes that once were private became a way of expressing things she had never spoken. It was therapeutic, enlightening, and empowering all at once. She started noticing small signs of encouragement in the world around her. People would listen attentively when she hummed or tapped a rhythm. Friends and acquaintances would comment quietly, praising without exaggeration. These small affirmations built her confidence, creating a gentle but steady momentum. Her life, which had been ordinary, began to feel layered with possibility. She realized that remarkable moments don't always start with grand events. Sometimes they begin with small, sincere actions offered honestly to the people around you. One simple tune, played with care and heart, had changed the way she saw herself and the way others saw her. By the end of this period, she understood that her music had become a bridge, not to fame, not to attention, but to human connection. It was a tool for empathy, a way to share emotion without words, and a reminder that even small gestures can carry profound impact. She carried this understanding with her, quietly, humbly, and with a sense of anticipation for what might come next. The world was ordinary, but now it held extraordinary possibilities, waiting quietly to be discovered in the next simple, remarkable moment. The day after her second small performance, she woke up with a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. The ordinary streets felt different somehow, not because anything had changed, but because she saw them through a new lens. Her mind replayed the notes, the expressions on people's faces, the way silence had stretched and held meaning after her music ended. It was a quiet triumph, and she carried it with her, a secret joy that no one could see unless they had been there. By midday, word had begun to circulate quietly among those who had heard her play, not in a loud, sensational way, but through casual conversation and quiet admiration. People spoke of how a simple tune had become unexpectedly moving. Some remembered the trembling hands, the calm voice, the honesty in her expression. Others recounted the feeling of connection, how the room had changed while she played. She did not know until she saw the subtle nods and smiles from people in public spaces that they had shared the memory with others. It was strange and beautiful. Later, she was approached again, this time by someone she barely knew but who had clearly been present during one of her performances. The request was different now. They asked if she would play for a slightly larger group at a community event. It was still casual, still a small ask, but there was more weight in the words than before. She hesitated, thinking about the attention, about exposing herself more than she ever had. The room had been small, intimate, and private. This would be different. Her heart beat faster, but it wasn't fear alone. There was excitement, too. She thought about the way music had connected people, how it had created a moment of shared understanding that was unplanned and authentic. She realized that even if this next performance was slightly bigger, she could still offer the same honesty. She could still play for connection, not for judgment. When the day of the event arrived, she was prepared in a new way, not with formal training or rehearsals, but with mindfulness and focus. She allowed herself to breathe deeply before stepping into the room, listening to the sounds around her, feeling the atmosphere. People gathered quietly, curious but not demanding. The small group's anticipation was gentle, respectful, a reflection of the care she had begun to inspire. She began her tune slowly, letting each note resonate. The simplicity of the melody remained, but she added subtle variations born from instinct and emotion. Her hands moved with quiet confidence. She was aware of the audience, but she did not let their presence dictate her playing. Each note was honest, deliberate, and filled with a calm intensity. The music flowed naturally, bridging the space between her and the listeners. Something extraordinary happened in that room. The group's attention became almost tangible. People leaned in, some closing their eyes, some tilting their heads, all absorbing the music fully. They were not just hearing, they were experiencing. She could feel the subtle shifts in energy, the way emotion traveled through space and touched everyone present. It was not dramatic, it was not forceful, yet it was undeniable. When the last note faded, the silence was long, stretching like a breath held collectively. She opened her eyes slowly, meeting the gaze of those around her. Some had tears in their eyes, some looked at her in awe, some were smiling quietly. No words could describe it, and perhaps none were necessary. The music had spoken for her, and they had listened. The connection was real, profound, and unspoken. Afterward, people approached her, gently and respectfully. They asked questions, expressed admiration, and shared their feelings. They spoke of how unexpected and moving the performance had been. One person mentioned that they had not expected a simple tune to feel so alive, so full of emotion. Another said they had felt a quiet warmth that stayed with them long after she stopped playing. She listened, feeling both humble and amazed. These reactions were different from applause or applause-driven performance. They were sincere, human, and meaningful. The experience left her reflective. She walked home slowly, replaying the performance in her mind. She thought about how a simple act had created ripples beyond her imagination. Music had given her a voice she never sought, a presence she never imagined having, and a way to touch people's lives. It was not about recognition or fame. It was about human connection, the kind that grows quietly and leaves a lasting impression. In the following days, her life began to shift gently. Opportunities appeared, small at first, like invitations to play in community spaces or gatherings. Each request was different, yet they all carried a similar tone of curiosity and respect. She accepted some, declined others, learning to navigate this new world carefully. She wanted to honor her own comfort and boundaries while still exploring the growing possibilities. Her perspective on music changed as well. What had once been a private solace became a bridge to others. She experimented with tunes, explored rhythms and melodies she had never tried before, and allowed herself to play more freely. She felt a growing sense of responsibility, not to perform perfectly but to share honestly. She began to understand that her talent was not measured by technical skill alone, but by the ability to communicate and connect. People in her community began to see her differently. They treated her with subtle respect, curiosity, and admiration. It was not overwhelming or showy, but it was noticeable. She realized that her presence, once quiet and ordinary, now carried a gentle weight. Not everyone understood fully, but those who had experienced her music felt a change, and that was enough. She also noticed how the music affected her personally. Each performance, each sharing, strengthened her confidence and sense of self. She learned to trust her instincts, to rely on her honesty, and to find courage in vulnerability. The simple act of offering music became a way of asserting her presence in a world that often overlooked quiet individuals. It reminded her that even small contributions can be significant. Her evenings continued to be a time for reflection and growth. She would play alone, replaying what she had performed, exploring new melodies, and feeling the connection that music offered. It was a private practice and a personal journey. She began to see that her art was evolving naturally, shaped by experience, emotion, and the quiet encouragement of others. Each note became more intentional, more expressive, more alive. By the end of this period, she realized that life had subtly transformed. Her days remained familiar, the streets still ordinary, the routines unchanged. Yet something had shifted inside her. She carried a new awareness, a sense of possibility, and the quiet joy of having touched others in a meaningful way. She understood that her journey was just beginning, and that the small, simple acts she had once overlooked could ripple outward in ways she had never imagined. She had been asked to perform a simple tune, and she had delivered more than anyone expected, including herself. The experience had changed her life quietly but profoundly. It taught her about courage, honesty, and the power of human connection. And as she looked ahead, she felt a sense of anticipation for what might come next, knowing that even the smallest opportunities could shape the future in remarkable ways. The months that followed were a quiet journey of growth and discovery. She continued to play her music in small spaces, for small gatherings, but each time she did, she felt herself stretching a little more. The simplicity of her tunes remained, but they carried a depth that seemed to deepen with each performance. People began to notice her presence, not in a loud or exaggerated way, but in a subtle, lasting manner. She was becoming someone who could quietly influence the mood of a room, the hearts of listeners, and even the rhythm of ordinary life. With each new performance, she gained a better understanding of herself and her music. She explored variations of her melodies, experimented with pacing and expression, and learned to communicate her feelings more clearly through sound. It was not about perfection. It was about honesty and connection. She discovered that when she played with intention, even the smallest gestures in her music could carry profound meaning. Every note she played was a reflection of her thoughts, her emotions, and the world she observed around her. The community around her began to respond in ways she had not anticipated. People shared stories about how her music had moved them in subtle, unexpected ways. A quiet mother spoke about how she felt peace while listening. A tired worker mentioned how it lifted the weight of the day, and a child smiled, fascinated by the gentle rhythms. They didn't speak in grandiose terms, but their gratitude and admiration were sincere and meaningful. It was a reminder that her art, though humble and unassuming, could leave a lasting impact. She continued to be humble, cautious not to let attention overwhelm her. She had learned that fame and recognition were not the goal. The goal was connection, honesty, and the ability to share a part of herself that had once been hidden. She valued the quiet appreciation more than loud applause. It was these subtle, genuine reactions that mattered most. Her growth was not measured by accolades but by the moments she created and the feelings she evoked. As her confidence grew, she found herself open to opportunities she had never considered before. Invitations to play at community events, small gatherings, and casual performances came her way. Each request was approached carefully, balancing her comfort with the potential to reach more hearts. She didn't chase attention, but she embraced the chance to share her gift, understanding that even modest acts of music could ripple outward in meaningful ways. She noticed changes within herself as well. She became more patient, more aware of subtle emotions, and more attuned to the world around her. Music became a lens through which she observed life, finding inspiration in ordinary moments, small gestures, and quiet interactions. She realized that beauty often existed in simplicity, and that the simplest tunes could carry the most profound messages when played with sincerity and care. Her daily routines remained familiar, yet they were now infused with a sense of purpose and possibility. She would wake, carry out her responsibilities, and integrate music into her day whenever possible. The act of playing, even in private moments, brought a sense of calm and fulfillment that extended into other aspects of her life. She discovered a quiet balance between duty and creativity, between ordinary life and the extraordinary potential hidden within it. The relationships around her began to deepen as well. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues responded to her music with warmth and understanding. They saw her not only as reliable and quiet, but also as someone who could inspire, comfort, and connect through her art. These connections were subtle but meaningful, reinforcing her sense of belonging and purpose. Music had become a bridge, allowing her to touch people's lives in ways words often could not. One day, she received a request that felt different from all the others. A local community group invited her to play at a larger gathering, an event where more people would be present, but it was still informal and approachable. She hesitated, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was a step forward, yet it was not a leap into the unknown. She had grown through smaller performances, learning to trust herself, her music, and the connection it created. She accepted the invitation, aware that this was another chance to share something meaningful. When the day arrived, she played with calm focus. The crowd was larger, but attentive and welcoming. She felt the familiar rhythm of connection, the subtle energy of shared experience. Her hands moved with confidence, her heart steady, and her mind fully engaged in the music. Each note carried emotion, honesty, and presence. The tune, though simple, felt alive, full of intention and resonance. The audience responded quietly but profoundly. People listened intently, leaning in, closing their eyes, or smiling softly. The room felt alive with the gentle power of human connection. After the performance, There was a long, shared silence, a recognition that something special had occurred. They approached her afterward, offering appreciation, admiration, and stories of how the music had touched them. Their words were sincere, grounded, and deeply moving. Through these experiences, she realized that her life had changed in ways she had never imagined. She was no longer invisible, but she was not seeking the spotlight either. Her life had shifted subtly, quietly, in the most meaningful way. She had become someone who could touch lives, create shared experiences, and leave a lasting impact without ever leaving the essence of who she was. She had found power in honesty, connection in simplicity, and fulfillment in quiet influence. Even as recognition grew, she remained humble and grounded. She continued to live simply, integrating music naturally into her daily life. She valued privacy and introspection, understanding that the most profound moments often came in quiet, unassuming ways. Her talent was no longer a secret, but it was shared with care and intention, preserving the integrity and authenticity that made it so special. Looking back, she understood that everything began with a simple request. She had been asked to perform a tune, small and unimportant in the eyes of the world, and through that moment, her life had shifted forever. The performance had not been about fame or perfection. It had been about honesty, courage, and connection. And in embracing that small opportunity, she had discovered the power to influence, comfort, and inspire in ways she could never have imagined. Her journey continued quietly, naturally, and purposefully. She played for friends, for neighbors, for small gatherings, and sometimes for herself alone. Each performance carried the lessons she had learned. That music is a bridge, that honesty resonates, and that even the simplest acts can ripple outward in meaningful ways. Her life had been transformed, not by dramatic events or sudden fame, but by the gentle, persistent power of sharing something real. And in this way, she moved forward, fully herself, carrying the quiet joy of connection, the humility of simple talent, and the profound understanding that even a simple tune can change everything forever.